or four big points or kinds of summary that I thought we might try to take home with us. The first thing, and this draws very much from our conversation about ICE and local organization, is that democracy really depends upon things that are more fundamental than democracy itself. So democracy is a word that we use and maybe a bit overuse, but the idea of rule by the people is something inherently hard, is something inherently dramatic. The people have to want to rule. And why we want to rule is brought home by very basic things, which we've heard about. Very basic things like the body, very basic things like children, very basic things like dignity. Democracy is a way to have some kind of control, autonomy over those very fundamental things. And so when we say democracy, when we think about democracy, we have to remember its connection to those more fundamental things. And we have to remember that to talk about those more fundamental things, we need a moral language. The moral language has to be on our side. The other side tries to monopolize it. It thins it out, it skims it away, it abuses it. But you can't do democracy without a moral language. That's one thing that I'm going to take away from all of this. The second point that I was thinking about, that there was no good place to insert here, but I'm going to insert it now as a historian, is how we think about ICE, Chicago, America, in connection with what we know about the past. And some of these points came through, I think, already indirectly, but I'm going to try to make them directly. There is a long tradition of using undocumented people as a first step towards creating zones of statelessness, zones where the law doesn't apply. The Nazi regime in Germany, as almost nobody remembers, its first really large-scale act of oppression was the deportation in the autumn of 1938 of undocumented people, undocumented Jews. That was their first major action, and it was a step towards border zones and concentration camps, or as we prefer to call them, detention centers. So there is a history of this. There is also a history, as I alluded to before, of using the undocumented as a kind of exceptional case, as a justification for centralizing the police, which is what happened in Germany after 1938 too. Different kinds of police organizations are brought together under one heading, which makes things possible that weren't possible before. So this is a reason to be very concerned. And I say this because as locally important as ICE is in Chicago or in any city, it is also a very important example of the transition that they are going for. Because ICE isn't just what it's for, ICE is also for what it's meant to become, which is a national paramilitary organization answerable only to the president, which can act against citizens as well as non-citizens. That's what it's meant to become. It doesn't have to become that. And what it means also is that local resistance is also national resistance, that there's significance to what we've been talking about, which goes even beyond the protection of individuals and their dignity. That because acts of resistance locally are also slowing down this transition to a new kind of regime. Which leads me to the third thing I wanted to talk about, which is resistance, and what resistance is for. One thing that I think is very important, and I'm sure you've noticed it too, is that the people who actually organize and do important things, they are very often, in fact, almost always humble. The people who talk a whole lot are generally not doing a whole lot. And that's tricky for us because we are people who talk a lot and we are people who react to certain kinds of charismatic gestures. And it's important to remember that the organizers are often humble, and you can tell who's a real organizer by how they're humble. And that means you have to look out for them. It means you have to listen to them. It means you have to join them even if they may not have the loudest voices. And you have to support them with your time, with your energy, and also with your money if you can. The other thing I was thinking about with respect to resistance, and this is a point that I just wanted to say again, is that you have to keep doing the thing. I mean, it sounds very simple, but like in my life, I'm reminded of this when I go to Ukraine, when they're almost at 4 years of war, and when I can go to the front, it's because I'm in the hands of people who have been doing civil society organization in peacetime, during revolution, during a war, and I'm in relationships of trust, which people have built, and I'm not actually very worried. But the things that they are doing are absurdly difficult and risky far beyond what most of us hopefully will ever even have to contemplate. But they keep doing the thing. They just keep doing the thing, no matter how bad circumstances seem. And that's the lesson that Rachel kindly cited earlier in her remarks about being calm when the unthinkable arrives. Various kinds of unthinkability have already arrived. More unthinkable things will arrive. But resistance involves you still keep doing that thing. And I just want to stress, although I think many of you will already understand this, that to resist doesn't mean that you alone or your group have to do everything, right? We get demoralized by the Hollywood notion that there's one thing and there's a happy ending, we're going to solve it all. But the reason that's demoralizing is it creates the impression that you today have to solve it all. You don't, right? You today have to do something. You have to do it with other people. You have to do it in a zone where you feel somewhat comfortable, but also somewhat uncomfortable. You have to do it with people that you didn't always know before, and you have to keep doing it. And so long as we're all in that zone, I really do think that it's going to be okay. Like, that's what resistance comes down to. Yeah. And then the conclusion of that thought about resistance is that if we're going to get through this, we have to remember that resistance is fundamentally normal. This country was built on the principle, not that history is working for you, but that history is working against you. It's built on the premise that you have to resist. It's built on the premise that things like revolutions are actually normal. It's built on the premise that you can't be conformist and that you can't be complacent. Resistance is normal, and resistance is constructive. You're creating things when you resist. You're not just helping and holding things back, you're creating things. The institutions, the organizations, the networks, the mental and social habits that you're building up, that is what we're going to have on the other side. And I just want to say a word about the other side, because it's not coming to us. We're coming to it. We're going to get there. We're going to get there. And as we think about resistance, and as we practice resistance, and as we practice protest, it's very important to remember that we're not just against things, but that we're for things. And to work hard to articulate what it is that we are for, right? So when Rachel kindly showed this thing where I was in Cincinnati, and I did the same thing in Philadelphia at the No Kings protest, because I like the slogan No Kings, okay? I'm against this idea of lawless kings. It makes no sense. But what I did with the crowd was to say, okay, when I say no kings, then you should say freedom. Because it's not just that we're against something, it's that we're for something. And this is important not just practically, and also not just psychologically. It's important in a deep political sense. Because, sad to say, in the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, things are going to get worse before they get better. There are a number of things in this country that are already not working, and we've talked about them. There are a number of things which cannot just be rebuilt. They're going to have to be imagined again and built again. And in many ways, this is sad because some of these things were good. But we are entering an era of politics, it is my firm belief, where it's not going to be enough to say, let's go back, let's reconstruct, let's reform, let's choose our favorite points of nostalgia and go back to them. I don't think that's the terrain of politics where you can win, and honestly, I don't think it's available anymore. Too much has been broken. So just practically, the way we have to think about things is, I'm against something because I'm for something. And on the other side, there's going to be a future. And that future, and this for me is the key thing, that future, as we head towards 250 years as a country, it has to be much, much, much better than the status quo.